This week, Dan Neault from Imperva is with us to discuss the current state of data security in the cloud. Then Eric Tice from Wipro joins us to talk about the state of software supply chain security. Finally, in the enterprise security news, don't worry, IT and security funding is okay. And we have the proof in the form of at least 16 funding announcements today. Private equity firms are taking advantage of the dip in valuations to make a few acquisitions, KnowBe4 and ForgeRock. Legal drama, we'll discuss the Joe Sullivan case. More legal drama, we'll discuss the Splunk Cribble battle. Crypto drama, another week, another crypto exchange losing $500 million. New insights on breaches and ransomware and 2 new reports from Scientia Labs. Cybersecurity leaders have a hard time keeping companies secure, and cyber nutrition labels. All this and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Don't leave the door open. Secure your APIs with the Curity Identity Server. Curity allows you to centralize identity management policies with a solution developed by an expert team using well-established standards. Curity facilitates scalable security for apps and websites by offering a unique combination of identity and access management with API security. Protect your users, secure apps and websites, manage API access. Start your free trial today at securityweekly.com/curity. Companies big and small are using AwareGo's human risk assessment to measure the human risk factor in cybersecurity. This interactive solution allows companies to measure employees' knowledge and behavior across threat vectors such as phishing, passwords, sensitive data, and more. After completing the assessment, CISOs can identify vulnerable departments and roles and improve internal policies or procedures. Visit securityweekly.com/AwareGo to start your free trial. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy International Plain Language Day. This is episode 292, recorded on Thursday, October 13th, 2022. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Master of Marketing, the Mayor of Mayhem, President of the Keanu Reeves Fan Club, Tyler Shields. How are you?
That's actually true. I am the president of my local chapter of the Keanu Reeves Fan Club. Most people didn't know that. Which is absolutely 100% not true. I hate Keanu Reeves.
Somebody sniffing around your face there.
Yeah, that's my little friend Bogey. That's my guy down there. For those of you who don't know, my dog Bogey.
That's a great name, Bogey.
Yeah, he's one too many.
Yeah, so Bogey, speaking of Plain Language Day, that is spelled Plain, not Plane.
All this time, Adrian, all this time I thought it was because we were talking about airplane pilots.
Nope.
Okay.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that just after I introduce our second host here, our second co-host, the Czar of Zero Trust, the Captain of Content, Katie Tytler. How are you, Katie?
I am fine, but I did somewhat have a feeling that Tyler would go to the really bad pun on airplanes. Tyler, you're just predictable.
Yeah, totally.
But I do like your dog. Bogey's very cute.
He's a good boy.
Yeah. Pets on podcasts is always makes the podcast better.
What did you put in your beard?
When did I grow a beard? Is that what you asked me?
No, I said, what did you put in your beard?
It's called old age. That's why it's white. I didn't put anything in my beard.
No, why was Bogey licking you?
His natural sweet essence.
That's right. That's right.
Not buying it. Nope.
So international plain language. So I thought this was appropriate given this is a cybersecurity podcast. The actual text right off the website for it was, have you ever read a report, blog post, or other form of written communication? Did you have trouble understanding what you were reading? If so, it may be because it was not written with clear and simple language, or because you're an InfoSec and you're reading a vendor's website.
Or a press release.
Yeah, or a press release, or
something from your legal team.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like we're full of it. Full of content like that in this industry, and we're just full of it. I was actually thinking about putting together like a scoring system for press releases. And plain language would be, one of the categories of scoring for that, right? Like, did you actually tell me anything new about the company? Was I able to understand it? The amount of buzzwords and just the general readability of it. I think it would be fun to have like a scoring system for press releases. If not just for rating other people's press releases, then for putting together my own, right?
And isn't there, I think there's a plugin, and I don't know this for sure, but I want to say there's a plugin for WordPress maybe, or even it might be like a Grammarly kind of thing, that there's an actual approved academic way of grading the simplicity of written language. Have you seen that, what I'm talking about?
Yes, and I forget, it has a name. It has a very specific name. Maybe somebody in
something score.
Yes, maybe somebody in Discord can clue us in here, because I do not remember the name of it. But yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, that could be a piece of your formula for determining if press releases are full of garbage or not, right? We can give it that score. We can look at the number of security-specific buzzwords in use. We can determine a binary yes or no, whether it actually says something, like is there actual value in it, and then just kind of tabulate the score, and there you go.
Yeah. There's actually a lot of hate for Grammarly in InfoSec, and I'm not sure I fully understand that. I think it might be that it reads all your stuff, and it's a SaaS service. So, yeah, it does have access to probably some private communications, but it's really helped me in my writing. I've always found it really useful.
I'm a huge fan of it. Anything that does plain language for me is a win.
Yeah. All right, get moving on here. We have one announcement here. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit Security Weekly. Actually, Katie, you could do this one. You did this one earlier, didn't you? You want to take it?
You want me to read it? Okay.
Read it.
Where do we go? Oh, I scrolled off the wrong page. Oh no.
That went well.
Okay, I got it. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms.
One critique, /
You're right, and I said that in the intro, but you caught me off guard. I'm not wearing my glasses, so if we do it again, I can see that it's forward instead of /.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just feeling. I don't know. I'm having coffee instead of whiskey. I'm having you read some of my stuff here. I'm just off my game a little bit today.
It's okay. Apparently, I can't see the difference between a forward and a /. I can't see anything without my glasses. So, fun fact.
No worries. All right, let's get to our first interview today. This interview is sponsored by Imperva. Today's topic is the current state of cloud security, what you need to know. And we're excited to have Dan Neault, SVP and GM of data security at Imperva with us today. Dan has helped build and grow some of the most recognizable tech companies in the world at Microsoft, AWS, NetApp, Samsung, and as a founder and CEO at Stellus Technologies. At Imperva, Dan is focused on helping customers solve complex data security challenges. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Adrian. Great to have the opportunity to talk with you and everyone today. And I think you were looking for the Flesch-Kincaid grade level for the rating of simplicity, and I'll aim to try to keep it somewhere in the 8 to 9. So you can let me know how I do at that.
I love it.
Yeah, that's it's going to be a theme for the whole show. We keep the language plain and understandable. And that's it's something I noticed early in my career, especially when I became an industry analyst. I would get briefings from a lot of vendors, and I wasn't shy in stopping people and saying, "Hey, that term you're using, I have no idea what that is." Like the first time somebody started talking about POVs, I was like, point of view. Like, what? This doesn't fit the context. And they're talking about proof of value. So somebody decided proof of concept, wasn't the right term, and they started using proof of value. And, that's how I encountered that. And that's how I learned that north, south, and east, west have different definitions depending on who you talk to. So when you're talking about networks and north, south, and east, west, don't assume everybody knows what you're talking about. So language is, clarity is pretty important there. And so speaking of language and cloud, almost all our language for cloud and data security has emerged in the last 10 to 15 years. So Dan, help us understand, maybe you can give the short version of how we've come since cloud has popped up, and we didn't know if people were going to totally move to cloud and get rid of their data centers. Clearly they haven't, but where's our data live now? What's the current state there?
Well, the world of cloud has changed an awful lot in the past few years. 5 years ago, I had been at AWS for about a year. And at that time, customers had decided that for business reasons, for agility, for speed, for lots of reasons, certain workloads were going to go to the cloud. And they were still figuring out, how mission critical a workload they were comfortable with, what level of scale. They were taking their very high scale systems that have been running on the most powerful computers in the world and figuring out what could go on the cloud. So that's about 5 years ago. Now you go 5 years prior to that, we are still in the world of, I'm going to burst to cloud for certain parts of workloads. I'm going to have an architecture where some will be in the cloud, some will be on-prem. I remember doing what we called modern architectures back when I was at Microsoft, where you'd say, well, your core data, that's going to stay on-prem, but then maybe you'll have something running as PaaS, and then your SaaS layer, well, that can be entirely in the cloud.
Certainly, and you called it modern. You called it modern.
Yeah, I called it modern.
Well.
Well, yeah, I know. Isn't that nice? That was back when Windows Phone, remember Windows Phone in the olden days with that new UI that had the little tiles that was so cool on the phone, they put it on Windows. That was called modern. So yeah, you're right.
Yep, I remember that. Well. It looks pretty cool because you could have live tiles. I thought live tiles were really neat.
It's absolutely. But there was innovation elsewhere, and the rest is history. But yeah, modern is a pretty good sixth grade word. So it was safe back then. So you fast forward to now, and there are many companies that put their most mission critical systems on the cloud. And there are companies that say, hey, look, I see I'll put some of it on there now, but tell me what I have to think about and do to be comfortable over time moving more of it there. And what's interesting about this is these are, world-class companies that they know what they're doing. Say, hey, these apps, not quite yet. But then when they set out to go figure out, what is the leading edge? What can they do? What are they comfortable with? They know a lot about cloud. And they know a lot more about their previous world. And they're trying to sort, okay, how many of my assumptions, my experience, my judgment, how much of that is exactly the same in the cloud and how much is different? And I think that's it. It's pioneering, and the pioneers have gotten to a new level of moving to the cloud. And it's mixed. It's going to be mixed. The world's going to be hybrid, multi-cloud for my lifetime.
So, just showing the progress of the cloud, just the insane progress. Back when I was an industry analyst, I went to every AWS reInvent for 4 years in a row. And I would give talks on how the security practitioner role is going to be changing. A lot of it due to DevOps, cloud, and all the just the general speed of software development, and how that's really changing the role and the expectations. And as part of that, I would take a screenshot of the AWS console every year. And, just to show how much is changing year over year. And this was back in the day when every single AWS product had an icon, would get crammed onto a single page, and depending on what you wanted to do in AWS, you would click that icon, you go into EC2 or RDS or, whatever you're going to do. And it got more and more organized over time. And now there's so many, they can't put them all on one page. So you just use a search bar, or you browse the different products. It's well over 200 products now. But I remember those days when it would jump from like 60 to 120, and eventually got to that point where that screenshot wasn't even possible anymore.
Yeah, that evolution. I was there for a little bit over 5 years, and it was in the database analytics and AI ML area. And it's fun to see kind of that proliferation of technology, but that same proliferation of technology is off of the cloud too, right? You see it with Mongo, and Snowflake is on the cloud and multiple clouds.
Yeah.
You see a lot of innovation that's emerged. On IT generally has become exciting and leading edge and even more capable with, I'm going to say, the introduction of the new possibilities of these hybrid models.
Yeah. So, and to be totally honest, I'm not sure I understand why somebody would use a Snowflake instead of AWS, especially like I'm assuming most Snowflake customers are also using one of the clouds who also have data offerings. So I don't even fully understand the architectural decisions that go into some of that.
Well, there's each of the call them hyperscalers, cloud service providers. Each of them have certain capabilities on their own platform. AWS has a data warehouse that's like Snowflake, called Redshift. But Snowflake can run on multiple clouds to provide customers that flexibility. But it uses the underlying services. You talked about there being hundreds of services. Snowflake uses many of the AWS services. Just like when it's working on Azure, it runs on multiple Azure services. And there's nothing about it that limits it. It just takes advantages of those. And, one of the reasons that's very interesting is I take customers however they are. And most of my customers have on-prem and are on one cloud or multiple clouds. And they say, you have to protect all of it, regardless of where it is. And then it all becomes about, how simple can I make that? So if I'm, for example, covering Snowflake, and on AWS covering Redshift, and I'm covering Teradata, the answer to that has to be yes, in a way, which is, I think, part of what keeps it fun.
So I have a quick question for you. One of the things I've noticed, because I work in a company that does some form of, quote, cloud security, is it feels like when I hear prospects or customers or people out there in market, cloud security engineers, whatever, when I ask them, what's your definition of cloud security, I get a different definition depending on the role of the person that I'm talking to. Can you help me understand how you or Imperva, or even just you in general, how you would define the word cloud security, the words cloud security? And is it a breadth of different technology solutions, capabilities? Is it a single technology that you use to do cloud security? How do you approach it?
So it's a great question, Tyler. So cloud by its name means with these elastic hyperscaler types. Some companies will say I have a cloud security product and they're only looking at a single cloud. So whether it's single cloud or if it's multi-cloud, we'll just take that as one of the different dimensions. And then when you're looking at the security of the cloud, it's all the way down from the infrastructure, the compute, the storage, all the way at the top, the apps, things that are connecting to it. And then a lot of it is around the data tier, which is where I focus, is for all of your data stores. So just think S3, or you might have a data warehouse, you might have a relational database or a non-relational database. Any of those things that's running on it, that needs to be secure. And when I say secure at that level, in the olden days, we'd always just call it DEM for database activity monitoring. But just think of it as anything that is a data store, you need to be watching for behavior and having a judgment about that behavior. And in the world of cloud, you can have a database that would run as infrastructure as a service, which is in a way running in a non-differentiated way, just like it is on-prem. So you'd watch that. You could have a little agent running on that, and and that's fine, and that scales to a certain point. But often in the world of cloud, you have many different databases running in a managed way, And then you'll have logs that come out of those. And that's referred to as agentless. So a couple of years ago, Imperva acquired a company called JSonar. It's a foundation of our sonar technology that works at really limitless scale to go against agentless databases running on any breadth of cloud. So when I hear cloud security, it's like, all right, what tier am I at? First of all, what cloud am I at? Or am I multi-cloud? Then what layer am I at? Then at that layer, what type of store am I looking at? Is it analytics or is it databases? And then is it something that can be done based on logs with telemetry, or is it something that has to have an agent? And just one thing I'll add to that is when you're talking about the world of cloud and cloud security, most customers, when they're monitoring their data stores in an on-prem world, will be very selective about it. They'll just take part of it. But in the world of cloud, you tend to have broader telemetry to monitor what's going on because it's a little further away, and anything you can do to watch it helps you there. So cloud security to me is covering your fleet of because I'm a data security owner, covering the fleet of your data estate in any cloud that you're at. So I don't distinguish between them. Sure. But there'll be people that'll say cloud security, and they're just talking a pretty simple discovery thing in cloud. That doesn't solve a lot of business needs.
Yeah, that's what we've seen, right? I've seen cloud security can be as generic as show me all my assets in the cloud, right? Like just, I don't even know what's there. All the way up through, we want agents installed in every workload and be able to monitor the workloads and memory changes and syscalls at a workload layer. Or it could be a data-centric view. It could also be, I've even heard people come up and say they want cloud security, and when I press on them, they say, yeah, I need somebody to secure my Salesforce, my HubSpot, and my, insert other SaaS providers here, which isn't cloud security as I define it, but it certainly makes sense in, in a fundamental layer of they are cloud-centric services you're using, right? So there's just so many ways to describe it, and it's such an overloaded term. Do you think as a security practitioner, when I target the cloud, not the SaaS cloud, but the cloud that you and I would traditionally link this to, where do we start? Do we start with visibility? Do we start with workload analysis? Do we start with data storage security? Do we start with authentication, authorization-based monitoring and checks for actions at the auth layer? How do you get going in cloud security at a basic level?
I think at a basic level, it's take what we're used to from on-prem of having awareness of where all the stores are, and then the architecture of how those stores are being used to serve up apps, and then look for the behavior that you want to protect against or learn about, the activities you want to look at. There's the basics of making sure that security, as it is in any infrastructure, because the cloud is just a bunch of services, even though it's servers running services that are elastic and microservice based and all that. But it's a lot of the fundamentals of the infrastructure are pretty close to the same. Where it starts being different is in the world of cloud. The data might go to whatever your object layer might be, and then the data that one day is in that, and then you decide to go build a trained machine learning model, or you put into a data warehouse, or you go run it in a key value store, or maybe you run it in a relational database. It moves around more, if you will. So it's the data stores, the movement of the data in the stores, the sensitivity of the data in the stores. And because the data is in a way freed up in the cloud to move around more across different engines and not being held to as narrowly as on-prem, I think you need to look at get your infra right, look at your data architecture and your data flows, and then take a look at your personas. And this is where it gets very interesting. Because it's more flexible, you have more personas doing more use cases more quickly. And if you haven't designed to be able to monitor all that, you're going to be chasing what the business just did, because the business is going to go do things because of the business value. So I think it's a story of being proactive. Like the delay between, okay, I've got this data store monitored, managed. I see the events coming through. I'm using machine learning or whatever. We use machine learning and algorithms to say, okay, this is a good behavior. This isn't a good behavior. It used to be, okay, I'm going to do one type of database now, and 2 years from now, I'm going to do another database. And in the world of cloud, it's 2 months from now, I'm going to do another database, or maybe 2 weeks, or maybe tomorrow.
So it sounds like a lot of it, is just documentation, and discipline about, how you create new products internally, almost like you need PRDs for these things, right? Where do you start with the company? I think you already said it a little bit here. You've got to discover the data. You've got to understand the data flows, and then the personas. And when you say personas, I assume you mean what is the actual workflow look like? How is somebody how's this data being used, right?
Yeah, you're tracking exactly. So most of the world is in this status of taking things that have been running on-prem, keeping some of it on-prem, taking some of it and putting it in the cloud. So in that world, you need to do discovery and then data classification by sensitivity with the privacy to understand what they have. And then from that, understand what all their constituents or their the different personas that are running it, what the workloads are that are running and what those workflows are. And then they need to take a look at, in this slightly different world, what's going to change and what's going to stay the same. And then take their knowledge that they have about today's state, the current state, and then take a look at the future state, and then realize that even if it, to start with, looks similar in certain ways, let's just say that it's a combination of some stuff on IaaS and some stuff running as a managed service, just know that over time, more of it's going to be managed, and over time, more of it will be running in different data engines with those different workloads. And it's an interesting tee-up, because like in the old world, DBAs did certain things super well and were invaluable. Like they do exactly things at a lot of different levels to the database. Well, in the world of cloud, we have a managed database. Things that DBAs know the best in the universe still matter a lot. But those people that have those skill sets, some of that other stuff, it's no, I don't have to worry about that anymore. But you have to worry about some other things. You have to worry about the cloud security, and you have to worry about the architecture behind the data, and then the data security in a holistic sense. And I say that because just as when you're moving into cloud, the data is freed up to work in different ways. It's critical to have the right talent in any company. And I would say that you can have consultants come, you can have vendors help you, but companies, every customer should have people on their team that know what a DBA needs to know in the cloud, plus the cloud security, plus the data security. And they have different names on them, but they're not quite enterprise architects, and they're not quite right. DBAs. They're not quite those things, but they are that
cloud engineer, right?
Cloud, sure, you just coined it. And the great word about it, a cloud engineer, that's like kind of a coverall one. So we're good. That's good plain language.
Yeah. Somebody in the in our Discord chat, our live chat, was just talking about moving from one job to another with the same exact title in each job, but completely different jobs. Completely different role and responsibilities, which doesn't surprise me at all. With a term as simple as cloud security or cloud engineer. But certainly, I where I started out in IT, our DBAs were worried about, kernel configuration, semaphores, the SGA size, stuff like that, tuning the performance of our Oracle databases. And I'm sure those folks are happy that all that's abstracted away now, and they can let somebody else worry about the actual underlying performance of the database, where they just worry about database structure and architecture and things like that.
Well, I would just encourage anybody who's got any free time, because they've been liberated, to start really going crazy into security, because there's there's a lot more that's out there to look at than there was a few years ago. And for those of us that get into security and see all the different things you have to pay attention to, and then frankly take a look at the subset of it that compliance looks at some point the compliance is going to catch up with the security stuff. So I think that there's going to be a lot more work to do coming soon, frankly.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the big things I saw recently is a lot of third-party tools require access to your cloud, require access to your data. And I saw a report or something. Somebody had done some research or wrote a report, and one of the findings was it was a very high percentage, like 80% of third parties and tools that need access to your cloud to do their job. Be it monitoring or maybe UX monitoring or performance monitoring of your application, ask for way too much, way too many permissions. And I think that's something that we're currently kind of blind to. We just follow the instructions to set up the app, and once it's working, it's good, right? Like, we're not going to second guess the IAM role, in AWS that they have us create. We assume they've followed some kind of least privilege design principle, when asking for that, and apparently not so much. Not so much. A lot of third-party products out there will ask for a lot of permissions. Be able to see all your data, and just understanding that, like there's a lot of risk just tied up in that.
Yeah, we hear this from customers in a following way. Reduce the edges, make it all work together in a way that they can get confident that if they've given us access to some of their secure data, they can work within our surface area with other third-party technologies that plug in. And maybe to put into context of why I launched our suite, which is the activity monitoring, the analytics, and then the display in a way that a non-security genius can look at and understand something that happened and what they need to go do. So we use
plain language, you might say.
Plain language. There you go. Yeah. So we use a combination of machine learning algorithms to take a look at the thousands of events that happened and what 3 or 5 really mattered, and then plainly show, hey, you guys better dig into this one. You better understand what happened here. But what customers have asked us for is cover the entire fleet from mainframe, mini, on-prem, colo, clouds. Cover all of that to take away that edge. And they've also asked us to cover all data, structured, semi-structured, non-structured data, cover all of that data. And we do that with partners to make sure we're covering all of it. And when you think about that, it's, you can have data stores that are running in multiple clouds, and then ones that are not cloud natively, but can run in a cloud because they can run an IaaS. Yeah. So we have to cover that whole surface area.
You guys work with mainframes, right?
We do. We have a nice mainframe team on Austin, and I know them well because it's valuable assets still on the mainframe. You bet. But it's that broad thing, and then being able to work with us to cover all of that, which requires us to have a strong partner play. We use partners, to make sure that we're managing their data well. We use partners for context data, like for our machine learning for training or to look for exceptions. We'll have features like Workday or Splunk or ServiceNow to go take a look at that. And then we also work with third parties for data capabilities we don't have, like data masking, or we work with third parties for encryption. So it's that's the play I'm doing, is to make it easier for customers to get the business benefits of covering all of it, whether on the cloud or on-prem. And maybe put another way, if you're going into the cloud, we're probably ahead of you, so we'll be able to cover you.
So what does that implementation journey look like? Like using your product, for example, you've got a customer come to you and they've got stuff in the cloud, they got a mainframe, they've got on-prem, they've got Snowflake, I'm sure there's plenty of companies out there that just look like a sample pack of data products and projects where they've got at least one of everything. Where do you start, and what does that journey look like as you with a requirement of we want to see all of it and manage all of it?
Well, we do use POV for proof of value, but what it starts with is you basically need to go set up the sensors, if you will, the agents or agentless, to get the data in, to monitor the things that are critical, and then have the alerts. Now, some customers, that's all they want. Just bring all the data, bring it all together, show the monitoring, show me all the activities that happened, and I'll go sort it out. And anymore, there are some customers that are doing purely on-prem. It varies different parts of the world, different industries, but most of them, it's a mix of agents and agentless. And we have many customers that just go purely agentless, no agents at all, because it's much faster to get up, provision. It'll vary at a wide scale. But one of the things that we always like to be able to show is, using our self-training machine learning. Let's go watch it for a little while, and then we'll show you if there's something that's really exceptional. And that's a light up. So the first one, I'll say, it can take a period of, a shorter period, days, weeks, whatever. And then building the trained model so that it's really tuned takes a little while to self-train for their environment and all that. Mm-hmm. And then, so that is a good in itself, and it shows to that. But what I see from the customers that are using a broader fleet is when they're covering a broader area, they need this path of simplicity amongst the complexity. So the data comes in and is displayed in a single place where they can go take a look at it and just make sure that the system is well monitored for that sense of confidence, and then take a look at the history of different things that have happened. So it's a sequence, and we have a professional services organization, and it's relatively small. We work with SIs. We have a number of customers that want to know it all themselves, so they do it all themselves, or they work with their partners. We're agnostic about that, but we have a pretty good group of SESAs that go help customers set that up.
Yeah, I assume talking about the anomalies that you look for, one of the easiest ones is just a systematic scrape or dump of an entire data store. And we see a lot of breaches where this happens, and I'm sitting here imagining, like, even the most basic anomaly detection has to be screaming, if somebody's just systematically taking terabytes and terabytes of data and exfiltrating it. So I guess maybe give me a couple ideas of the kind of stuff that you would alert on once these models are trained and they know what normal looks like.
So something like that would obviously be trained for. What gets a fun scenario is just a query that's a fine query. It's a SQL query. It makes sense to you do that query, and it might even be a query that you'd expect certain people in certain roles to go make at a large volume. But what gets interesting is when you take a look at what the characteristics of a user class, meaning what their access privileges are, and what their normal role is. This is where you do integrations with things that tell you something about the people, and say, hey, this is a normal query. This is a normal query for people in HR to make, or people in finance to make. This is not a normal query for this person to make at this scale. And then that triggers an alert. That's a little bit more of an interesting scenario. And those are the interesting scenarios. It's like any of these things separately look fine. This combination of things, that can't be fine. There's something going on here. And either want to shut down access or quickly go talk to the person. So there's an example. So we have a library of this set of patterns indicates this behavior. And when we started this, we'd say, hey, here's a few of them. You might want to watch several. And most customers try to provision to watch for all of them, because they're just saying, hey, there's a lot of complexity here. If you're going to go help me see these patterns, I will do that. So this whole data risk analytics area of using machine learning, which is wonderful. I'm a big believer in machine learning because it doesn't get tired. It doesn't make the kind of mistakes that people make, but it's always an augmentation for people's judgment. So I'm a big believer in machine learning to show you something and saying, I think this isn't right. Why don't you go take a look?
And it addresses one of the issues that I often talk about with security products, which I call the customization tax. And back in the old days, like when I would buy a SIM, none of the canned reports would be useful to me, because the vendor doesn't know what would be useful to you, to their different customers. They have different needs and requirements and constraints, and you just have to put in a lot of elbow grease, to figure out what reports to create, what to alert on, that kind of thing. I think that's one thing that machine learning has been helpful for is kind of closing that gap, to where, you don't want the customer to have to do 100% of it, but you don't know what you don't know, going into, a new customer. A great example is I've seen so many cases where something that would be like a 5-alarm fire, drop everything alert in one environment looks totally normal in another environment because they do something weird, or that they don't follow they don't have things configured the normal way, and it's a false positive for them, whereas for the other company it's the worst day ever.
Yeah, you're right. You're right on that. Like the different rules that we have that people can go set as a default, because a lot of customers will just send it the default. They'll make sure everything's operating, and then they'll trust that. But then as the model gets trained, it becomes more expert. It becomes more tailored to them. I think it's just I assume that as IT continues to evolve and be more powerful, that we should fully utilize modern technology to make it easier for whoever is trying to watch it and see what's going on, and have the default configuration be very good, out of the box, be very good, and only get better, and have it be show what it's doing to get better in a way that people can go track. That's really the path forward for this. And it does that automatically. It says, hey, this event might be okay for you, may or may not be okay for you, but I think you better go look at it. I think that's a pretty winning play.
And that's a very nice and hopeful note to end it on, I think, Dan, because that's really what we need, is products that point us in the right direction. Dan, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks very much, Adrian, Tyler, and Katie. Cheers to you.
All right. Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Imperva to learn more about what we were talking about today. We also have some nice links in the show notes. And stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk software supply chain security with Eric Tice from Wipro. When it comes to cybersecurity, the biggest threats are the ones you never see coming. SecureWorks detects and responds to cyber attackers' ever-changing tactics. We come armed with Taegis, a security analytics platform designed to recognize attacks and stop them before they do harm. SecureWorks, defending every corner of cyberspace. Learn more at securityweekly.com/SecureWorks. The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation of cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. All right, welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. And for our second interview today, Eric Tice joins us to talk about the state of software supply chain security and trends in managing threats. Eric has over 20 years of experience in IT and is very involved with awareness and education at the OpenSSF and SALSA organizations. He's currently a global director of strategic technical consulting at Wipro. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. As I think we were talking in our prep call, is this comes up constantly, supply chain security. We've followed, particularly as people have started attacking, different repositories, like PyPy, NPM has been a big one. So maybe before we go too far, let's talk a bit about what we mean when we say software supply chain security, because I'm talking about one particular part of it, but how do you generally define it? Where should we define the edges here before we dive deeper into the conversation?
Yeah, so that's a great question. A lot of people in the industry, especially now, are talking about cybersecurity, and one aspect of that is software supply chain security. If you think about the supply chain in a typical distribution network for retail or merchandising or other areas, there's a very specific build and deliver methodology that exists in that space. In technology, it's not really any different. As you start to think about the ideation of new tools and products and solutions that organizations will build for their customers or their clients, there's a very specific supply chain that exists to make that happen. And in that context, that can be made up of either traditionally proprietary technologies by very large companies or open source technologies. But that typically involves the building of software, the process to manage that build, all of the checks necessary to validate the functionality of the software, all the way to its delivery to the end consumer, i.e. in technically a web page, for example, that the end consumer would leverage at any time. So it discusses the security of that complete life cycle from development of a software all the way to the delivery to the end consumer.
Yeah, and I think one of my favorite stats that really drives it home, and I have no idea what the stat is, I just know it's closer to 100% than zero, but the amount of software when companies are building an application that is actually written by that company versus being libraries or components that are pulled in. Like, for example, building a web page, these days, you're probably going to use some kind of framework, or some kind of content management system, even depending on the type of web page it might be.
And that's absolutely correct. One of the things that's a key component in trying to deliver is speed of delivery. And when you're talking about assuring that you can release something quickly, behind the scenes, organizations tend to use those frameworks or pre-existing technology. And one metric, you mentioned metrics, is that between 96 and 98% of any given application written within the industry these days contains at least some portion of open source software, which is really something that many people, specifically consumers, don't think about or understand. But that is something that has really been a discussion point over the last couple of years, given some of the cybersecurity attacks that have happened.
Yeah, definitely. And it's if we could only get chief revenue officers to just be a little bit more patient, security would be so much better, right?
Well, a common misnomer, though, is that if you build it yourself, it'll be more secure than leveraging open source technology, which, at the outset, that may be true, but that's certainly a conversation can be had about the speed of delivery of open source versus proprietary technology and what the effect of that on security is.
And honestly, I'm not sure it matters like how you're building it or where you're getting the components you're using to build it. You're probably using open source somewhere. And I still get the impression every now and then I read a quote from somebody who's talking about the problem with open source, I just get the impression they have no idea how embedded and pervasive it is.
That's absolutely true. I think that in the industry itself, that's really sparked a lot of movements. A lot of foundations have started to come up, like OpenSSF, which you mentioned previously, that helps to try and manage and mitigate some of these potential security risks. And certainly there are a number of standards and other organizations like OpenChain and SPDX and others that seek to solve some other aspects of this problem. But certainly that's one of the key concerns is how do you select the open source you're going to use, and how do you validate that it is secure in the context of your application?
It seems like we've had systems for signing code and making sure code is secure for a really long time. It's just I don't know, maybe it comes back to speed or the fact that so much of the software that we depend on just has a single maintainer in a lot of cases. But do you have a good idea or an impression of why, we haven't seen more of that? Why we haven't seen, code signing and things like that, and more security used, even though it's available, for like a lot of the package managers we depend on and things like that.
Yeah, so in some cases it is being used. It's potentially not being used properly. If you discuss effectively, in some cases you would have a conversation where you would check in your code and it may have been built into a binary prior to doing signing. You may branch it off, or it may be forked in a way that it potentially is not secure enough when it's signed that there's a gap that somebody can exploit and when that solution is potentially signed. And maintaining the fact that the code that you use matches the signature at all points, as I mentioned, from development all the way to delivery, that if you're rebuilding the code at any time without checking and managing those signatures, that can cause problems as well. And to your point, why are we not doing this? The speed of delivery is one particular area, and we talk about the difference around package managers and areas of open source versus, proprietary tooling and their SDLC process or software development lifecycle, where that code signing hasn't been incorporated because, quite frankly, a lot of organizations tend to not think about security during the development process. It's typically a post-production implementation where the code that's being deployed is secure, but has it been secured throughout the process is the question.
Yeah, one particular example I found interesting. We talked about this on a show a couple months ago. One of the NPM packages that got compromised, and this is one that got compromised directly. Like they took over the maintainer's account. They were able to get into their NPM account, which I think NPM is now owned by GitHub, if I'm not mistaken. is they actually, the malware was installed by the npm install script, and depending on how you grab that npm package, you might install it directly, or you might, if you install it through npm, that install script gets run, and that install script would determine if you were on a Mac or on Linux or on Windows, and that would actually pull in the malicious code. So I found that interesting because it wasn't the actual npm package itself that had malicious code in it, but the install script for the package, which, to be completely honest, I didn't even realize npm install scripts were a thing before reading about that story.
Yeah, and that's often something you note if you ever use initial installers, or you do the automatic update on software on a Mac or on Linux. That's a very real potential problem, is that you're pulling in versions of packages based on the manager itself, rather than going and retrieving the information or updating, say, a POM file for your code. You're updating the system itself with a new version of npm, or one of potentially thousands of dependency packages, without really thinking about what's being requested. It's always been assumed that that manager would be accurate, and there would be a vulnerability check on the back end to assure some level of security. And unfortunately, this particular incident showed that that's a very real potential problem that fortunately has seemingly been addressed to this point. But that did cause a lot of people quite a bit of headache for some time. It was a very public problem.
Yeah. So I've seen two trends that I've found notable. I think with regards to software supply chain. There's the many eyes myth, which I think it's safe to call it a myth at this point. That if it's open source, it's getting somehow looked at more closely for security issues. Like I feel like we can call that a bad assumption. Like maybe it is if it's like a KeyPass or something like that. But there's so many tiny libraries, that have probably never been looked at anyone but the maintainer that's built them, I feel like. So that trend, and then the more directly to what we were talking about with npm, we've seen a lot of these package libraries, these package managers require their maintainers for at least like the top 10,000, I forget exactly the number required to enable MFA now, to try and stem off or prevent some of these account takeovers. Are there any other trends that you've seen, or feel free to comment on anything I've mentioned, that either positive or negative, with regards to the state of software supply chain security?
Yeah, and I think the reality in the industry has really been a shift over the last couple of years, where people have started to realize that a shift left, or a more developer-centric mindset towards security, rather than the traditional CISO-based network and final product security that comes where, some very large legacy organizations, or organizations that have just worked with the same mindset for a lot of years, have done penetration and vulnerability testing, once a year, or quarterly, or bi-yearly, or biannually, where you would typically go and check all your vulnerabilities, determine your security, and do a sign-off. Where now the trends are really more coming back to, as you noted, some things like MFA are valid, but that's really more about accessing the code itself, where a lot of the trends in checking the code and assuring the security of code have come down to more specific practices around when code is checked in and pull requests are built, automating the processes around vulnerability checks at that stage, rather than making it a more periodic. It's an automatic process. And certainly GitHub, for example, is one small example where they have tools built in already to do that automatically for you, like Dependabot. And certainly the cloud providers who have GitHub or other repositories built in have similar types of products, as well as starting to think beyond just typical vulnerability checks into things like configuration management and security, Code signing, as you mentioned previously, is an automated process within the context. So the full automation of a traditional, what would have been considered a traditional CI/CD pipeline, to incorporate more functional, secure capabilities at that stage, so that it's early and often, has been the trend to start making code more secure. And this is not only true of an organization, but at the open source level as well. One of the key points you mentioned is that, sometimes projects only have a few developers in the open source world. And it's often been a discussion point or a mindset that if a open source or any project built is in Maven, it's already been scanned and is 100% secure in that context. Well, as you find, if you pull those things down and run them, any of these dependencies down and run them through a vulnerability scanner, often they have security gaps in and of themselves. You'll get specific levels of capability, and that's not even to discuss the potential of typo squatting and other problems from that level. But certainly one last trend I'll point out is that in leveraging open source, one of the key education points for a lot of companies is to start thinking about using the source code and scanning the source code prior to using any binaries, to assure that the version that you're potentially leveraging is actually secure and has done the due diligence necessary to provide some level of safety. And certainly we can talk more about proprietary and other ways of solving this problem. But just speaking at that code level, these are some of the top trends I've been seeing.
And it seems like there are some key things that you can scan for, and looking at most of the malicious stuff I've seen inserted into some of these open source libraries, almost all of them tend to pull in external libraries or there's a C2 component to it, or like a lot of them want to mine Monero. So it seems like there's some key things you want to scan for. So I don't know what people are typically using these days, SaaS tools, what they're using to scan this stuff for. But do you have any suggestions there? Maybe anything open source they can use to scan this stuff?
So there are a lot of tools available to do this. Certainly in scanning a code base, you can do a number of things. Like I mentioned, if you're using GitHub and certainly GitLab, and there are a number of other repository tools as well, have a similar tool. But starting out with something as simple as Dependabot and GitHub is one area. Mm-hmm. But there are SaaS-based tools, and I'm not specifically going to say one is better than the other, but I will say that there are a number of them out there. The nature of my business, we work with a lot of different vendors, and it's best tool for the job. But there are certainly a lot of them out there. Mend, formerly White Source, Fossa, Black Duck, Sonatype, and a number of other organizations have quite a few. And there are several open source ones too, by OWASP and others that are provided that can be leveraged with a lot of, like SNCC has an open source version as well, for example. So, and there are many others, not to discount the importance of some of them. But in the industry, even the Linux Foundation has created a security component that is built off of SNCC and Blue Bracket, which Blue Bracket does that configuration scanning that I mentioned previously. So there are a lot of innovations and continued improvements in the industry to help solve these problems. And, one of the benefits of using these is that you have a community or a proprietary or commercial organization that continues to keep those threat files and that landscape of potential threats up to date, so that you as an organization don't necessarily have to do that yourself, because that can be quite a daunting process to try and keep up with all of the potential new threats without leveraging some community that does that.
Right. And speaking of community, let's shift a little to talking about some of the work you do with OpenSSF. Maybe a good entrance in is we could start there. We could talk about some of the stuff that's been coming out of the White House, which has been, I think, night and day from what we've seen in previous years, where we've seen a lot of focus on SBOMs and supply chain security, and we have an item in the news today to talk about the IoT security labels being something that they're starting to focus on now.
Yeah, and I think it was widely enough spread in the news last year about the executive order on cybersecurity, and certainly there was an email out from the Office of National Cybersecurity Director this week, or within the last week, that talks a little bit more about some of the work that they'll be doing around education, training, awareness, and the cyber workforce development. I'm starting to really think about developing these skills at a broader scope, where OpenSSF, and I'm one of a very large number of people that are contributing to these initiatives, and certainly won't put myself forward as being one of the premiers, but I do contribute where I can. There are a number of working groups and special interest groups that have kind of built off of what's happening around the cybersecurity needs. The key components being, or that came out of that, was a mobilization plan by OpenSSF that really started to look at ways to solve a number of problems, like identifying threats early, mitigating those threats, and building essentially CERT groups or SWAT teams to be able to help do that, as well as an education group and an SBOM Everywhere special interest group, all of which to address some of these key components. The ones that I focus more on are the education group and the CERT group, where the education group's key charter is to really start to look at where the areas of education are lacking. Where are we in traditional development trainings, be it college curriculum, high school, all the way down from K to 12, start to think about and talk about how we're educating the young mind, all the way to seasoned professionals who potentially haven't had access or the need within their jobs previously to really be thinking about cybersecurity, because it's traditionally been a siloed group that managed security for the whole organization, rather than it really being developer and operations centric. So how to re-educate and provide them the capability, the knowledge, not only in these groups, but also in some of the areas where underrepresented groups in technology, like Women Who Code and others who are potentially not getting the ability to get a lot of these things, and thinking more globally, not just in the US. OpenSSF is really dedicated to solving these problems at a global level, rather than just what the US is focused on. But certainly these are some of the key areas. And I think OpenSSF has spawned a number of interesting projects and working groups that anyone can join. It's completely open source, and anyone who's interested can come and contribute to these projects.
Yeah, and I think so. There's a couple of important points there. One, talking about the not just depending on the security group. The idea that we have a security team, so security is not something I need to think about, is I think a mindset that we're going to be overcoming for a while, and hopefully the education work that OpenSSF is doing there can change that. But yeah, I think that's an important psychology or concept in general for people to understand, is that your security team will never be big enough to manage all the security issues in the organization. They've got to, other people in the organization have to pick up some of that, have to take some of that responsibility.
Yeah. I think one of the key points that's important there is that a lot of these siloed organizations, even when it comes to like the provisioning group and in conjunction with security, if you have an organization that does more of a buy versus build mentality, it's not really thinking about the licensing, the governance, and other management of open source technologies and what the potential repercussions of those are, because the assumption is that the tools that they've purchased or brought on have already covered those solutions. And I think one of the things that happened over the last year that really drove home just how true this isn't is the Log4Shell issue that touched almost, a very large portion of the industry. And then following that, the Spring for Shell issues for Java-based type of applications. So these types of things were always considered just simple applications. Apache had a few of its own minor hiccups as well. And all of these cases, no one thought about it. And these are core to a lot of application structures under the hood that a traditional security or provisioning organization may not have had the facility or the plans to mitigate. So I think that educating them beyond our organizations and projects in open source, beyond the context of just what they're building, to understand truly what the bill of materials, as you mentioned, SBOMs, what their software bill of materials is, and providing some level of transparency and assurance to the end user or the consumer of their software is a key step in educating folks on how that potentially is leveraged is very important.
Yeah, and what you're talking about, some of the projects that OpenSSF launched, and one of them, that's been interesting to me is Alpha Omega, because there's this idea out there of, well, we depend heavily on all this open source software, and it's almost a joke at this point. I think maybe it was an XKCD, maybe not, maybe somebody else who put the comic together, but it's like a stack of blocks or something like that. There's just one tiny block that's integral in the bottom, and it says, one developer from Minneapolis maintains this in their spare time, and it's this huge, enterprise application stack. And it, looks like that project is, kind of exists to answer that question of, okay, who's going to fund security, for these tiny but essential open source projects. And one other thing I've seen that's kind of given me hope here that I'd love to see more vendors do is one vendor I worked with, and they didn't even market the fact, but if they were heavily dependent on an open source project and, they were doing good on their revenue numbers and had profit, like some of that would go back to those open source projects. They would donate it back to the ones they depended on, which makes sense because you want an incentive there for them to stick around, because you don't want to have to write all that code yourself if all of a sudden that maintainer throws in the towel, right?
Adrian, you should also look into, there's a company called Tidelift out of Boston. They do a kind of a model where as a vendor, as a company, as an enterprise company, you can subscribe to them and kind of say which ones are the key open source systems that you use, and they essentially onboard those open source developers and pay them to maintain their own code off of the bigger vendors. So highly recommend taking a look at them as well.
Cool. Yeah, I just found the website and posted it in the chat.
Yep.
Any other thoughts there, Eric, on supporting, how we can support and secure some of these smaller projects?
Yeah, I think, Alpha Omega is certainly one. And it was, came out of one of the working groups, the Securing Critical Projects Working Group. Things like existing projects like the criticality score, the scorecard projects are all things that help to define, what the posture of a given open source software is. And to your point, it's not just a developer in his house or his garage who work on these things. Very large organizations contribute to open source all the time, including mine. And in this conversation, you can look at most of the large tech vendors and many of the in the BFSI, the banking finance space, are very open source minded. But in this context, contributing to some of these projects is really critical to making sure that the industry stays ahead of the game, right? Alpha Omega is all about proactive, starting to evaluate and look at targeting really key projects that are leveraged by the majority of the industry, that are very potential that have a high criticality score for a larger portion of the industry. And then thinking about the Omega side of that, which is really the long end of identifying 10,000 or so critical applications that need to be governed and looked at for potential problems, and building the teams around starting to proactively mitigate and look for ways to resolve any potential unknown problems in these areas. So Alpha Omega is just one of them. You mentioned SALSA as a framework, which really starts to discuss what is the potential provenance of an application. It's 4 levels to determine, at each stage of the SDLC, am I managing security in a way that drastically reduces and mitigates before delivery any potential security threat. So, and there are many others, and I encourage anyone to go to OpenSSF. All of the projects are on GitHub, as are the special interest groups, and attend some of the meetings and contribute if you can. Certainly will help the industry. The more that contribute, the more secure the industry will be at the end of the day.
So, how do you see regulations being able to help here? Is there anything? Is that going to support the OpenSSFs, the tide lifts here, the SALSAs, or is that kind of coming at it from a different perspective? That can also maybe help. Like, is it collaborative or is it separate? I guess is my main question there.
Yeah, so OpenSSF itself is collaborative. It's not meant to be a compliance organization. It provides recommendations, best practices. There's a best practices working group, as well as potentially projects and pointing toward key, well-tested types of projects that can be leveraged to do these types of activities, rather than being an ivory tower that dictates how things should be. But it does very closely work on looking at what governments and the White House, for example, and others are saying are relevant and important in the industry, as well as I'm sure you're aware, the UN has its own cybersecurity agency as well. So looking at a number of these things to determine what are the key points that are important across the board. But at no point is it seeking to be a specific compliance agency where it forces a need to adhere to what it releases. It's more looking to be that innovative mindset and a place where people can come and collaborate to come to consensus on what the best practices are and how we can educate and train people to better utilize those practices.
Yeah, and maybe shifting a bit to the other part of the title that we've got here, trends in managing threats. Let's talk about that for a little bit. So a lot of what we've been talking about is kind of getting at the core of making sure the software is more secure from the start, making sure it's signed, vulnerabilities are taken care of. But what about managing the current threats? Understanding that the root of the problem probably isn't going to be fixed for a while yet, right?
Yeah, and it's certainly more of a marathon than a sprint. It's not something that you can jump right in and resolve all the issues. But management comes down to a few different things. So governance procedure updates in an organization or on any given project are critical to assuring that you're proactively and consistently looking for ways to manage any potential threats within your projects and your application landscape. Now, this, again, I mentioned a few things to help manage this up front, and automation will be a key component of that, pulling in the right tools to really start to mitigate that before it's a problem. One of the key things that I've seen a lot is that organizations will do a scan and software can't be released or will no longer be leveraged by a company if it doesn't pass the scans. Now, within a reasonable expectation. So there are potential risk factors that are high, medium, and low. And if they're considered low enough, they may not be immediately fixed, but assuring that all of the high and mediums are addressed as quickly as possible. Organizations, and in the case of open source projects, will have to build in the appropriate roadmap to allow for resources to update these and do the appropriate testing and have a mitigation plan as part of their broader risk management procedures to assure that these risks are essentially addressed as they come. Now, to your point, it is something that is a consistent potential issue. If you're leveraging software that potentially hasn't changed for 6 years, the potential for you having a high risk factor or potentially a very high score and risk is very likely. Whereas if you're automating and you're managing these processes consistently, you should be able to mitigate them quite rapidly without any major issues. But this is certainly something that needs to be addressed at the process level. You need to really begin to think about how will you set a risk mitigation plan and an overarching governance plan to assure success in this area.
Yeah, definitely. And it's understand what your options are, right? Like in some cases, maybe something fails a security check, down your CI/CD pipeline. Like maybe that's the only library out there that does that, and it's not like you're gonna just rewrite the library, or swap something else in 5 minutes. Like you've got to have some kind of plan there, I imagine.
Yeah, and one of the key components here, and I've actually seen this be a fairly big deal on a project that I was helping to update very recently. It had a library. It was an open source project, and actually had a library which was open source that had stopped being maintained over 4 years ago. So as you can imagine, the security aspect of that was pretty far behind. So you really have to start weighing what are the potential issues of doing a rewrite to your code to find something or find another path. If to your point, there wasn't another library that does exactly what it does, how long will it take you to build and manage that? And some of the discussion point there is that, SBOMs, again, we come back to that. It's assuring that there is a transparency and understanding of if there is a risk, what is the roadmap to fix that? What are your potential risks of having that within your code or leveraging the code with that security risk, so that you can manage the downstream effects of it. Your downstream customers or the consumer of your project is ultimately going to suffer if it's a high enough risk potential for hacking or cyber attack. Whereas if it's something fairly low, they may be willing to accept it for a given period of time. So you absolutely have to determine that. But leveraging SBOMs, and this is critical because it's not just open source projects. But if you're a proprietary vendor or a commercial vendor of software, and you're releasing software that has, a fairly high set of external dependencies that you leverage, assuring that your downstream user has full understanding of your current security posture will be critical to people purchasing software in the future. Because as part of that risk mitigation plan, before an organization procures something new, many will start to demand that SBOM as an initial discussion point as to just how secure can you show me your application is.
Especially, I think Log4Shell almost provided a service there, really bringing that to people's attention, because we got to see in real time how much vendors knew about their own software supply chain. It was interesting how, same day that this thing was announced, some vendors were like, all right, yes, it's in our software, or no, it's not in our software, and here's the status, and here's when we'll have it fixed. And other vendors, I think, took over a month to get that to customers, to get that analysis to customers, which was very, I'm not going to name any names, but very eye-opening. I think very interesting public test of different vendors' abilities, or just how mature they were in terms of understanding what's in their stack, what's in their product.
Yeah, and one of the things that OpenSSF has done, they are a part of the broader Linux Foundation, is for open source projects, they've started to offer a best practices badge for open source projects, so that they can adhere to a number of very specific security check marks to show, and if they pass, they'll be granted the badge to show that their application has followed the best practices necessary to potentially show a solid security posture. And having those badges, and conversely, consumer or proprietary technologies that have or can show that they leverage open source that have succeeded in obtaining these will help to show a certain level of security posture moving forward. And I think we'll start to see OpenSSF being one, but I think we'll start to see more and more of these assurances or these types of badge functions moving forward, so that people can stamp their code and their software as being secure. I think that's going to be a trend moving forward, that it's not only going to be are you doing multi-factor authentication, but beyond that, is the code that you're actually handing to me or allowing me to leverage as secure as it can be.
I'm not sure if I was aware of these badges, but they're very cool. I mean, that's about as clear as you can get, right? Giving a score to something. But yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to say there'll always be some risk factor. Nothing will be 100% averse to risk. We'll certainly, within any given period of time, it can appear that you're 100%, but on hourly to daily, there can be new threats that can be discovered, and they may be in the software, but that nobody was aware of. And again, these are things like Alpha Omega and others that will certainly be working to try and identify them. But these are, it will give you a reasonable assurance, far more so than what has been in the past, that your applications can be as secure as they possibly can be.
Awesome. Any questions, Tyler or Katie?
No, super cool conversation. Thank you so much.
Any other resources you want to mention? I know we've got several in the show notes today. If anybody wants to check those out, it's at securityweekly.com/ESW292. But Eric, any other good resources we should mention before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I think in general, you can go to the Linux Foundation. There are a number of solid training opportunities that are free, like securing software development fundamentals courses, ones that dig specifically tooled towards SigStore, which SigStore is a code signing technology that is built. You can look that up as well. Salsa, SLSA. .dev is another good one, but I encourage you to look at a lot of the open source foundations and groups like OWASP, OpenSSF, OpenChain, and SPDX when it comes to SBOM. So those are a few of the ones. There's certainly a lot, but OpenSSF and the Linux Foundation has a very broad library of working groups and training that I think are worthwhile. So I would definitely recommend starting there.
Awesome stuff. Eric, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly Enterprise News. managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management. Trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more.
Attacks can't be prevented, but they can be stopped. Modern cyber attackers have already made it inside your network, but you have the upper hand. Find and eradicate threats with ExtraHop network detection and response, and shut them out before real damage is done. Learn the advanced techniques attackers are using and how ExtraHop stops them with a live attack simulation. Register at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP.
Customers want fast and frictionless digital experiences, yet also expect protection against breaches, privacy violations, and fraud. Drive engagement by optimizing security and convenience to attract and retain customers. Use the PingOne cloud platform to build, test, and optimize digital experiences. The no-code orchestration engine weaves together authentication, user management, and MFA, all of which can enhance security, drive engagement, and boost revenues. Visit securityweekly.com/ping identity to learn more. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. And don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. I saw that Sam was just sharing one that I had completely forgotten about, where I think it was me, Tyler, and Paul doing talking about building a lab, to learn at home, learn security stuff at home. We talked about different kinds of security labs and, what you need to build it, considerations to take into account. It was a lot of fun.
So, Adrian, I have a question about that. Give me the hot take on, is it worth doing a physical lab these days, or do we virtualize everything in the cloud?
For me, I think it's worth having stuff can get expensive real quick in the cloud, especially if you forget that you were running it.
Gotcha.
Like I remember back in the day, I did the CIS benchmark for BlackBerry Enterprise Server. And to run a BlackBerry Enterprise Server, you need Active Directory and you need Exchange. And so I ran all that on one large EC2 instance. And I remember I would do things in it. I would take screenshots and stuff like that, take notes as quick as I could, and shut it back down. Like I'd try and get everything done in an hour, so I didn't have to run it for too long. So, I bought an Intel NUC with 64 gigs of RAM, and I forget how many terabytes of storage, just to set up as a VMware ESX server. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was worth it. Like you don't need, like back in the day, back in the aughts, I had 2.5 racks in my garage, like old compact gear, and had a SAN and all kinds of crazy stuff. You don't need any of that. Like that one NUC for me, that's I rarely need more than that.
Yeah, the times have changed. I definitely in the late 90s, early 2000s had racks in my tiny little apartment with sun systems on it and all sorts of crazy stuff. And I don't think you have to do that anymore. But anyways, it's neither here nor there. That's a different podcast that we can point people to, a different show. What do we got for our show?
For our show, we have some assurance that funding is okay in IT and security. I think this was, where did I end up putting this? Number 19.
If we just look at the sheer number of funding announcements, it's not going down.
Right. It's right at the end of all the funding and the acquisitions. It's number 19. Battery Ventures says we're okay. Plenty of dry powder. Tech spending is holding steady. Funding is holding steady. I don't think we were that worried. We saw some layoffs. We've got maybe a down round in here, but nothing that's the end of the world. There are 16 fundings.
60 fundings, you said, bud?
16.
It's interesting because on October 6th, Crunchbase News put out an article, and I'll send it to you so we can link it in there. I just read it this week, but I didn't put it into the show notes. But global VC pullback is dramatic in Q3 2022. So it depends on your vantage point. Like we're talking, 60, 70% decreasing in global VC movement. Now, if we micro that down or focus that down into cyber, maybe it's a different percentage. Just cyber does tend to have resiliency. But I believe, and I'd have to dig up this article as well, I don't know where it is off the top of my head, there was also a cyber article that came out in the last week and a half from Crunchbase that showed a pretty significant decrease in the number of deals and the dollar of deals on the cyber side as well.
Well, it's hard to have hindsight when you're in the middle of it, right? And nobody's really sure how long we're going to be in kind of this downturn. Like a lot of people are saying, 18, 24 months. And if that's the case, we're still in the first quarter of it.
Yeah, it's tough to tell, right? I mean, the market really collapsed in March. In the March timeframe is when the public comps all completely started to collapse down. The high-tech, high-growth comps seem to have bottomed in June, July timeframe, right? We keep bouncing off those bottoms, and actually, that being said, the last couple of weeks we've broke those bottoms, but there is still some downside potential there. But it's how much further can you go when you're 80% compressed off the highs? I mean, really, what we're seeing now, and what makes complete logical sense, is the two massive Vista acquisitions that have occurred this week, right? And I think you've got them in the show notes, correct?
Yep. I've got, you said two Vista. I've got a Vista and a Tomo Bravo.
Yeah, one was Vista, one was Tomo Bravo, right? KnowBe4, and I forget who the other one was off the top of my head.
It was ForgeRock.
Yep. And both of those are multi-billion-dollar acquisitions of publicly traded cyber-related companies. And the reason that happens is that when you're 80% depressed, the private
it's a buyer's market.
Yeah, exactly. The private equity money comes in, does a massive buyout, snaps up the whole thing, waits for the economy to rebound, which is going to happen in 18, 24, 36 months. They hold it, and then they flip it at double the money, right? So when you see that big money making moves, that's when you should be making moves as well. So I think we got to be coming close to the bottom here by the end of the year.
And do you think some of it is also
money moves?
Money moves. That's right.
Money moves. Do you think some of it is also, the cybersecurity market has historically over the last couple of years been pretty bloated. And so this isn't so much of bottoming out in security, other industries, different story, but this isn't so much a bottoming out in security as a shoring up.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's how you spin it, right? I think, when I say bottom out, I'm talking about the publicly traded ones, right, that are hitting new lows on their share dollars, their share prices. When you're talking about shoring up, I think it makes a whole lot of sense for PE to do roll-ups of multiple companies into platforms, right? That's what happens in this stage of the game. General just acquisitions like these two we saw, where they will sit on them for 2 to 3 years and then flip them back out as a new IPO for, $5 or $6 billion compared to a $2.5 or $3 billion acquisition and double their money in 3 to 5 years. That's where we are in the stage of the tech depression right now.
Yep. But, LP funds are still there. We're still seeing VCs raising funds, so, the amounts haven't been insane. Like that's ended. We've stopped, we've had no IPOs. I don't think we've had any security IPOs this year.
Quiet. Yeah, it's gone very
and we haven't had a single unicorn since very early in the year, much earlier in the year. I remember earlier in the year, we were talking about where are unicorns going to be by the end of the year? It's going to be crazy. It's going to be huge. And it just dead stop, came to a dead stop.
Yeah, last year we were flipping up that unicorn graphic that Gus made like every show, multiple times. It was crazy.
We had a unicorn with like 10 we had a decacorn graphic.
We had a decacorn graphic. That's right. That's no longer what we talk about now. Even the publicly traded companies are getting picked up in the 2 to 4 billion range, right? It's like that's not, the concept of the cyber decacorn is definitely shrinking fast.
Yep. Yeah, and even the ones in the high end, it's been a while since they've received their valuations, Tanium and Sneak. Yeah, I think it's Sneak. Earlier, Eric was saying SNCC, but I think people know what we're talking about when we say it both ways.
Yeah, and I'm not, you can't really comment specifically on a company by company basis here for what I'm about to say. So I'm not applying this to SNCC or Sneak or whoever. But what we're seeing now in the market is extension rounds, so that companies don't have to take down rounds. They're finding somebody who's willing to take extension and apply a bunch of ratchets to it, which will guarantee a certain amount of return or first rights of return. So there's different ways you can structure these deals so that the unicorn still remains a unicorn and doesn't transform back into a horse, right? And so we're seeing some of that occurring. We are seeing some down rounds that are occurring, right? And the smart companies will just accept the pain, take the down round, and figure out how to go up from there again. But that's not easy to do when we're talking about the dollar amounts that we're talking about and the egos of the individuals that we're talking about.
Yeah. It was I forget who the other one was, but there were two this week that were extensions, and I was very confused by it because typically they don't do a press release when they do an extension, because it kind of looks like a down round.
Extension's the new up round, Adrian.
Yeah. So Expel was one of those. They increased their Series E to 171.3 million. I think it was like an extra 30 or something like that. And I've forgotten who the other one was here. But also stuff some convertible notes, debt financing, stuff like that. So we're seeing some non-standard stuff we typically don't see with startups calling themselves unicorns.
Yeah, and those debt financings are gonna dry up too as interest rates continue to increase and the cost of capital increases. The debt financing will decrease as well. So you won't see those. Those are going to be a blip in time that'll go away.
Another 150 basis points or something like that. They're expecting, I think.
Yeah, and that's why we're seeing the markets collapse even further than they have to date.
Yeah, that doesn't make Arctic Wolf any less remarkable, being mostly services firm that's valued as a software firm. I still think that's amazing. And certainly they've got some numbers to back it up. 3,000 customers, 1,100 channel partners, mix of large enterprise to SMBs. It seems like they really caught a comet with that one, especially with all the other MSSPs out there that have been getting consolidated.
It's absolutely shocking to me. The number that's shocking to me actually isn't the 3,000 customers. It's the 1,100 channel partners. If you think about that, literally every seller on the planet that's not a dedicated direct seller for a vendor, every seller on the planet is basically selling Arctic Wolf.
That's all of them.
Everyone sells them.
That's literally the full list. Yeah. Yeah, and Expel. So our number one, number two are both MDR MSSP firms on the list. Because I do order things by size of funding round.
You're so smart.
No, it's more OCD than smart. It's just, it helps me get my bearings, especially when we have 16 fundings.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know if we can go through them all. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, so something I've been trying to do, I didn't get to everything here, but I try and put a note about what category they're in so we can more easily see trends here. Security number 3 here is data security cloud. Why would you name your startup security?
Yeah, you know what? Probably because, and I have no idea if this is the case, I'm going to guess that they didn't have a marketing person when they named the company.
It's going to be so confusing to market this company. So it's security with an I instead of a Y at the end for folks that are not looking at the notes here. It's
but they've been around for a while, for 3-4 years, I think at least. I think they've been doing pretty well. It's part of that trend where you want something that's familiar but a little catchy. Just if you want to be quote cool, then you just change the spelling of something. But it certainly makes it hard from an SEO perspective and also from a just pure remembrance perspective.
They're sitting at around probably right around 400 employees today, with over 50 employee openings, job openings today.
Wow. Yeah,
it's pretty big.
Yeah, it's pretty big. And it's data security is pretty huge, and it's interesting. Trying to get an idea of what they're doing, but one of the use cases I hadn't noticed as much that I'm starting to notice with data privacy, data security startups is with GDPR. If somebody asks, you got to produce all the data you have on like a single customer. Especially if you're B2C or B2B2C, something like that. I imagine that's not easy at a lot of companies. So that's one of the use cases I'm starting to see here. And there was one particularly, I think it was Data Grail, was the one that really leans hard on that data subject requests. Making
the American Data Privacy Protection Act pretty active right now, and potentially on the horizon. If that passes, it's going to be pretty impactful to organizations, just finding an individual's information across the countless systems that a company has, because right now data handling is pretty out of control at most companies. It's in siloed tools, it's in various places, it's owned by different people, it's secured in different ways. And I once, when I was an analyst, talked to a company, somebody who had worked for a company. They got a data request. It was probably 5 years ago at this point, but he was saying it took them like 6 weeks just to identify all the places where this particular person's data was. And that was one request. So now if the ADPPA becomes a regulation, you're not going to have one request. You're going to have potentially, if US citizens care, you're going to have hundreds or maybe even thousands of requests. And the amount of manual work that will take, it's just not doable. It's not possible to do manually. So there needs to be some sort of automation, which means that somebody needs to build platforms. And I would imagine that, there's some entrepreneurs out there who are already thinking about, all right, here's the possibility. This bill is moving pretty quickly. It has some opposition, but not huge opposition. It is a bipartisan bill. This is probably coming. And so I imagine there are a lot of companies, but there are companies like this security that have been doing things like that for a little bit. They're on the front edge. We're definitely going to see more as the potential regulation comes to play here in the next year or so. And then it'll be, just like GDPR, it'll be a couple of years before it's actually enacted, which is enough time for people to go out and start building companies.
Yeah, back when I was an analyst, I often said I thought data security would be the last major area that the security market would tackle, just because it's such a pain, because it's so difficult. And this is I think what we're seeing is a specific portion of it. I think still the data that are handled directly by employees are mostly left out in a lot of the data security startups that we're seeing. I haven't seen anybody revisit endpoint DLP or, sharing stuff securely. I think most people are leaning on enterprise file sync and share like Google Drive and Box and stuff like that to handle that side of it for now. So I think we'll see that revisited. But yeah, maybe this is end times. Where it is the last major category. I think that I mean, everything else is kind of rehashes of existing stuff, right? Like we're seeing people revisit SOAR. We're seeing companies revisit, breach and attack simulation is out now. It's like employee training stuff. So it's number 4, immersive labs.
Endor is redoing SCA, or at least trying to reevaluate how we look at code reuse and securing kind of the entire life cycle of open source code. Yeah,
dependency analysis and all that. Yep.
Which that's an interesting one to me. That Endor Labs one. I know the founder there, Varun Badwar. He is
that's a seed. That's a seed funding, $25 million.
Yeah, that's why I was bringing it up. Right, that's a $25 million seed funding, not an A round. That's a massive seed funding, and it really comes on the back of Varun having founded Cypher Cloud. Then he was early on in Redlock, if he didn't do a founding role there, and then he was GM and SVP of Prisma Cloud at Palo Alto. Like, very well-known dude. And then he connected with 2 PhD technical co-founders to build Endor Labs. So other than the goofy reference to Ewoks, I think it's a pretty cool project, at least from a founder perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a software supply chain. I almost brought that up with Eric. I almost considered tackling 2 of our stories with him because 2 of them are really connect with that previous conversation we just had. Endor Labs, which is number 9, and the other one is way down, number 29, SemGrep Supply Chain. So both very focused on open source, understanding open source dependencies and where the vulnerabilities lie within those.
Yeah, as much as I would have loved to have gotten involved in Endor Labs myself, the name makes me think of Ewoks, and I just put a very cool picture into our Discord about Ewoks. And then the other one that I want to bring up that has the most ridiculous name, and I know nothing about this company, so it could be the best company that ever existed, but NARF Industries, N-A-R-F. That would be number 13.
I'm sure they're a lovely company. I know nothing about them, but no, that's terrible.
No. NARF? It seems like something a Muppet would say.
It's very close to Snarf.
It is. Like, I could see the Swedish chef chucking a pot over his shoulder and going, Narf. Like,
wasn't Snarf the little cat-like creature in Thundercats?
Can you believe? Here you go. A little known fact: I've never seen Thundercats in my entire life.
Well,
I don't know I don't know Thundercats, but I know when you snarf something, you eat or drink it quickly and it comes out your nose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's not do that.
Yeah, no, that's not the name I want associated with my company. Again, I don't know about this company. I really hope they're a good company, but naming matters.
Yeah. I love their website's very cute. It's security without the snark. Well, and it's funny because the only acronym I ever came up with that I had the nerve, not being Gartner, to come up with when I was at 451 Research was Cloud Application Control was my name for CASB, the name I came up for the CASB space. And then Javad, who lived in the UK, and this is a UK-based company, NARF Industries, was laughing at me because CAC means poop in British slang. And,
I'm sorry, is that my computer playing the NARF?
Yeah, you're playing Thundercats or something. I can hear it.
Who?
No, I just went to NARF Industries. Was that their website?
Music on their website?
I just went to NARF Industries, yes, and music started playing. I do apologize for the sound bomb, but that's the NARF Industries
Don't
website.
apologize for that. That's the most amazing, horrible website idea I've ever heard in my life.
It's not making any sound for me. Or maybe I don't have the sound redirected to my headphones.
I do like their website. It looks cool as hell, though.
It does look cool as hell, but security without the snark, and then we just... Okay, it wasn't their website. Gus just confirmed that. Security without the snark, but we brought back the snark, so we are apologizing to you, NARF, for being snarky about your company.
Yeah, no, there's no auto-playing sound on their website?
No, that was Gus. That was totally Gus.
Their website is cool as hell. It's so cool looking. Cool. Like, the design's amazing. And quite frankly, I may make fun of your company name, but listen, it sticks. I'm not going to forget it. Your website's amazing. You got a free shout out on this on this podcast. Like, you're doing something right. Maybe I'm wrong.
It looks like they're kind of like a skunk works. Like they have a lot of kind of one-off, really interesting one-off projects. So it looks like, they've got to have something more focused if they're raising funding. But yeah, interesting stuff. Just wanted number 4 before we move past that. Just wanted to say I am a big fan of that. Reminds me of Range Force and Recon InfoSec. I think that is a big piece of the glue that we're missing in enterprise security today. Is testing both our people and our products' ability to detect and stop attacks, which is basically what all these companies are doing. Is hey, okay, you've bought all these shiny boxes. You've put your employees through training. Now let's simulate an actual breach, an attacker inside the walls, planning to ransom you or something like that. Let's see how you do.
I'm going to chuck something at you here, Adrian, because I've been having a debate with a founder very recently. He's a brand new founder. He's ideating his idea. And
he's wrong.
A very close
You're
friend
right.
Of mine. Very close friend of mine. And, I don't want to give away too many details, but his idea is kind of let's call it an application assessment type of thing that exists in cloud native, okay? And it looks at everything that you spin up in the cloud.
Okay.
I was pressing pretty hard saying, well, why don't you flip that on its inverse? And instead of becoming an offensive tool, do the defensive version of that and sit in every workload and figure out ways to do kind of AppSec at that layer. And fundamentally, it feels like every time I hear of an offensive business, okay, some kind of offensive security technology, there's a counterpoint that can be made for a defensive version of it that's a more informed version of that. Take DAST, Dynamic Application Security Testing. What is it? It scans applications from the outside. Flip it, turn it into defensive, and it becomes more powerful if you embed it into the application and look at all of the requests that come in and block it and, do some kind of RASP.
Did you once work at Signal Sciences? Because I feel like I'm hearing a Signal Sciences pitch right now.
You're not, actually. It has nothing to do with that. But fundamentally, I hear a lot of offensive technologies, and I tend to bristle at offensive technologies, and I'm starting to get the feeling I might be wrong. You said you liked them. This particular founder loves them. Investors that I've been talking to love them. Why are they the better way to do it than, say, flipping the reverse and looking at the defensive version of what you're talking about?
Because the problem isn't with products. It's not a lack of products. It's not a lack of technology. It's that you screwed up the configuration when you set up the products. Your processes don't work. They're fragile. The alerts that you're getting, you're not seeing the correct ones. You're filtering out the wrong ones. You're letting through the wrong ones. It almost, when I analyze every breach, it almost always comes down to process. People a little bit, but almost all the control failures that result in the breach are process. So for example, in the case of Equifax, the main thing that got them, there were 25 control failures that I identified, was that they didn't know how to find a vulnerable Java library in their company. They had a bunch of tools. Those tools could have found it if they knew how to use them to find it, but they just didn't. They didn't know how to find a vulnerable struts jar. And then we saw that again with Log4j. A lot of companies just didn't have the skill set to be able to find a vulnerable Java library in their environment, because you're looking for a single file, or in some cases, a single file within a file within a file, like 2 layers of zip files deep. It's hard to do that. And if you don't practice for that kind of thing, I think the struts case was the perfect practice round for Log4j, but a lot of people didn't take that opportunity to say, hey, we need to be able to, we don't want to be Equifax. Right. Let's study their failure and make sure we can quickly identify vulnerable Java libraries in our environment. And like I was mentioning when we were interviewing Eric, some companies did that, and it was obvious who did, because they got back to you real quick and said, here's the state of our product with regards to Log4j, and others really did not.
Yeah, so to take the commentary, which I love, back to the Immersive Labs funding, which is what started this thought process. You're right, I'm a big fan of training defenders in realistic simulations. Really, when we're talking about offensive cybersecurity assessments versus defensive protections for the same attack vectors, there's an added benefit that really should be bundled with the offensive side, and not just saying, look, we do offensive testing to find the vulns, to find out where we can get in, but to continuously test your capability to respond when we are successful as well. And that's where the value really may come from these outside-in type technologies.
The only difference between this and a pen test is every time the pen tester wins, they're going to stop everything, and purple teaming, this is effectively what purple teaming is. They're going to stop everything and say, hey, why didn't you see that? Why didn't you stop me? Let's go fix that.
Yep. See, I learned something every day from you, Adrian.
But yeah, I think it's super important, and it's part of what we did at Savage Security, my services startup, and we would find, in just a couple of hours, like you've got huge wins. If you actually ask, okay, what's the root cause of the failure here? And that kind of work made me very pessimistic about MSSPs too, because 100% of the companies that we did this kind of work on, those companies never got a call from their MSSPs, no matter how nasty we got in terms of emulating attacks and things like that.
And that's a massive added
never
bonus.
once.
Instead of just finding what you find, you're actually testing the response capabilities as well.
Yeah, of their MSSP, of their vendors. Yep. All right, let's move on here. Yeah, I don't think any of the other ones here are hugely interesting. Stairwell is kind of a weird one, I think. Malware analysis platform seems very 2012, not very 2022. But I'm imagining they're just gunning for maybe Fortune 100, companies large enough that they actually have somebody dedicated to analyzing malware. But the nice thing about this is Risky Biz, who I guess is a competing podcast, does these product demos now, where they just do a YouTube video and it's just somebody from the company and Patrick Gray just kind of doing a live demo of the product, and Patrick Gray asking questions as they step through the product, which is pretty. You can learn so much more about the product from a 30-minute video than scouring somebody's website for 2 hours.
Yeah, if you've not had the opportunity to talk to Patrick, I highly recommend you go ahead and look at his podcast. Patrick does amazing stuff over at Risky Biz. I've worked with him 7 years ago to do a bunch of podcast work. Very smart guy, and basically what he's doing is taking briefings on the technologies and asking really intelligent questions into the technology, the market, the use cases, et cetera. And it provides a great way for vendors to actually show their goods off.
Yep. Let's see. Moving on here, I don't have really much to say about the acquisitions here. They're huge private equity take privates. Taking advantages of the drop in valuations in those companies to get a good deal there. And honestly, it seems like it's a good deal for KnowBe4 and ForgeRock. But yeah, I don't really have much else to say there.
Yeah, I have no additional things to add versus what we talked about earlier. It's just fire sale, right? The public markets are so down. It's fire sale time. I would expect more PE acquisitions throughout next year.
Yeah.
Well, as long as it keeps companies and people in business, good companies, good people in business, then it's doing its job.
Yep.
So we don't want people to lose their jobs. That's for sure.
Yeah. Let's see. So crypto drama, number 20 here.
Crypto's still a thing, Adrian?
It is still. Well, we'll see. I mean, I don't know how many billions of dollars crypto exchanges can lose. I think it's over 2 billion so far this year that we've seen with this one type of attack. What do they call this type of attack? It's like an exchange, something or another. Basically, they're taking advantage of the fact that money has to be moved between different types of crypto. I think cross-chain bridge attacks is what they call them. Over 2 billion stolen this year. And these companies are trying to tell us that, people who use these exchanges, their money's not affected. I just don't buy that these exchanges have enough in reserve to cover these losses.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if they did. I would be absolutely shocked.
Well, further, there's no obligation because there's no regulation on it. So maybe they do, but that's different from the consumer actually getting what they have back. There's a huge difference between, hey, we have the money to do it, and we are doing it.
We saw cases this year with Celsius and Voyager are good examples where crypto exchange went bust and people tried to pull out all their money and it wasn't there. They didn't have it.
Exactly. So there's a huge chasm between, hey, we have the money to cover it, you're safe, and we are required by law.
Yeah, and I don't think those were rug pulls either. That was just, they didn't expect the market to drop like that. They're hoping all their customers don't try to pull out their funds all at once.
Well, where was the capital? Where was the capital, right? Because the point of a bank, for those of you that listening to the podcast
is to invest it, right?
And general economics, is to loan back out money that they take in, right, to make money, and they get a kind of a reinforcing.
They use money to make money.
Correct, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why they're required by law to have a certain percentage, and that's what a bank run is, right? When there's a bank run or a run on the banks, that means everybody's coming back asking for the money all at the same time, and they have to figure out how to unwind all those loans in a way to get the capital back. My question is, what's happening in the crypto world that's causing that shortage of cash, right? Because every time, ideally, in a basic sense, if I buy a token, I send the money to crypto firm X, they give me said token, they have the money, right? They hold the money. Now, what are they doing? Are they lending that out? Are they using that for leverage? That's the question: is where would the money go such that they were shorted they were too short if and when a bank run or a run on the bank were to occur on them? And I'm not sure where they're not loaning it out. Are they loaning the cash out for actions?
No, they're losing it. They're losing it in attacks. They're covering
my God,
thefts.
That's the worst. They're literally just lighting it on fire. That's the worst part about it.
Yeah, it just doesn't exist anymore. But it was never real money. I mean, not that, the US dollar or any other currency is, quote, real money either. It's all conceptual if you want to get down to it. But there was never any money there.
Well, there was my money.
It's all just playing cards.
No, I put money in there. It took cash out of my bank account. There was real money in there.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair enough. But if you don't actually touch it.
I think I made $250 in crypto in the last 3 years, so don't tell the IRS.
Wow, that's amazing. Are you going to buy a couple of houses with that?
No, I lost it in the trading market afterwards, so it's fine.
I was going to say that's maybe a round of golf, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's. I think we can call it money. It's just not the most stable form of money or safe form of money at the moment. So yeah, we'll see how this goes. I mean, the economic downturn isn't doing crypto any favors, and neither is falling victim to all these attacks. I mean, wow. That's why I wrote, in the intro I said another week, another $500 million stolen. Like it's just it's almost a guarantee at this point. Like since crypto's been a thing, it feels like we've seen $500 million go up in smoke a week.
The question is, though, most of these attacks on the crypto side, I believe, and I think this one you're talking about might be different when you're talking about these bridge attacks, but the original attacks, when money was stolen, it's stolen directly from wallets. It's from the individual person. So
hot
the
wallets,
exchange, the exchange doesn't get hurt by it. I mean, they do, right? Their reputation gets hurt, but they're not losing the capital that they have in the bank that backed the currencies. But this bridge one might be different.
I think it is different because this is, if you're an exchange, you manage many different types of crypto, so there needs to be the ability to move money between forms. So I just from the name here, from what I've read, it sounds like the attack. So I've seen two ways of doing it. Two types of attacks like this that don't take it directly out of customers' accounts. And one, I'm assuming it's taking advantage of the fact that you can move from one type of crypto to another.
Yeah,
and the other one,
you can do it on Coinbase and stuff now too. You can actually trade direct one crypto for another crypto without ever having it hit your cash account.
And the other one, it looked like there was an ability with their APIs to just generate a certain amount of currency, like you're going to move it between them. And they were actually using that to just generate money straight into their wallets.
Wild.
Yeah. All right. So other drama, we've got legal drama here. I don't know a whole lot about the Splunk and Cribble cases, except that it involves executives moving between companies and accusations that intellectual property was stolen. Because Cribble is kind of like a competitor to Splunk, as I understand it. I know a lot of people out there like Cribble. And beyond that, I don't know a whole lot about this, except it sounds like it's probably going to go on for a couple of years.
Yeah,
probably drag out.
I know nothing about the lawsuit whatsoever as well. But the name Cribble just reminds me of that Star Trek episode, The Trouble with Tribbles, or whatever that is.
Yeah,
that's what it reminds me of.
I wonder if that's how you say it, if it rhymes with Tribble.
The word Tribbles. That's the correct Star Trek episode, right? Tribbles? Truffles?
Yeah.
Troubles?
No, yeah, you got it.
Okay.
All right, so there's some great reports in here. I'm not going to say too much about them. I've got some comments on the page here. We're running a little long, so I'm looking to where we can spend our last few minutes. I kind of want to talk about the Joe Sullivan case, but I am actively working on getting a panel of CISOs and non-CISOs together to kind of discuss it. So I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on it, but we can talk about it.
We hit it last week while you were out too, Adrian.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, we did. We talked about it quite a bit, so we can jump it today.
Okay. Yeah, and the main thing there is there's a lot of details that were missed in most of the reporting, most of the discussions I saw. But yeah, we'll have a whole segment just dedicated to that. And let's see. UK is having trouble replacing GDPR since they're no longer part of the EU. They've got to come up with their own privacy legislation. No big surprise there.
Mm-mm.
And then White House planning labeling system for consumer IoT devices. I assume it's for consumer IoT devices. I also mentioned Germany's already got this. It's voluntary, so not a huge amount of companies have done it. Basically, companies that make broadband routers and have email services are the only ones who have gone through it so far. It's basically supposed to inform you about the security of the product and keep you in touch with the security of the product ongoing. So if something happens that compromises the security of one of these devices, you can get notified. And Carnegie Mellon also came up with a prototype that I think looks pretty good. I think we talked about it maybe like a year ago or something like that. So it'd be interesting to see here in the U.S. If we build on what Carnegie Mellon has already built here for consumer security labels. All right, and the squirrel stories here. It's interesting. We're seeing AI-generated stuff find its way into commercial products. So Bing is you'll be able to AI generate art and imagery and clip art, whatever you want, through Bing itself in the near future. And Microsoft is adding it to its Office suite. So currently in its Office suite, you can just search online libraries for clip art. Now you'll be able to just generate it, which makes a whole lot of sense, except I find it interesting that Microsoft is jumping into it so early when I think the question of, should art generated off of other people's copyrighted works be legal in the first place, it hasn't really been settled or solved, I feel like.
Oh, that derivative art question, that derivative copyright question is such a massive problem. It's been a massive problem in music forever, right? When you hear music that's created today and somebody finds something created like 70 years ago, and they're like, look, it sounds just like this. And sure enough, it does. But did that person even hear the original? Like, there's only a certain amount of chord progressions and chords
with
and notes
12 notes. Yeah.
I mean, it's like, come on, how distinct can you be? How far does it go? How far does copyright go? And I think this opens up a whole other can of worms.
It does.
Almost every year we see lawsuits on the music stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there are artists who weren't even born when certain music was released, and that piece of music never made it to mainstream, and then they still get sued, and they have to either pay big fines or share, some of the profits with somebody who never made it big, never did anything. That doesn't mean that people who aren't big names don't have good ideas. That's not even remotely what I'm saying. But the likelihood of somebody, there was an Ed Sheeran lawsuit not too long ago. Somebody like Ed Sheeran hearing about somebody who was active in the 1950s and 60s who never released an album publicly. And then Sheeran and his team actually stole that music. It's just unlikely. And it's litigious for, just litigation's sake. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and the same thing could absolutely happen here. But what I'm personally more concerned about, because this is clearly about me, is that this says that AI will write professional content for you, so I need a job. So if anybody's hiring, because apparently you don't need humans to do that anymore, so I don't know what I'm going to do. If you have any ideas, let us know.
Yeah, so that's it's a very clean website. Looks like a very cool tool. Like if you go to elphas.app, and it's elf as in elephant, but AS. So ELEPHAS.app. And the little GIF that you see when you go there, the little video, looks pretty impressive. And you do have to have your own OpenAI key. Because it's using OpenAI to do this, but that's.
I don't know. It's $4.99 a month, Adrian. I'm looking at the page about to click download now, and I'm just too cheap to put in my credit card.
$4.99.
That's a lot cheaper than hiring an actual content writer, though, Tyler. So you might want to do it.
I'm not going to use this for work. I'm going to use this to write.
I could see them charging $499 a month. $4.99 is a steal, dude.
Well, get the price. Limited lifetime, 77 slots available. Only 77 more slots available. $129 for lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's only Mac, and but pretty much any active text field, it's like a little utility that sits up in your taskbar that you can access. You just highlight your text, you access it, and it fixes your crappy prose.
I'm
just fixes it for you.
I'm so sad. This is a sad day for people who write. But I wasn't an English major, but this is an even sadder day for English majors because they just get knocked down every step of the way.
Yeah, it's So Tyler, next week we're gonna have to get some feedback from you, or if not a live demo.
You got it. I just purchased it. We're good.
If it works, it could save me a lot of time. I can purchase it, have it write all my stuff. There we go.
It's exactly why I'm buying it. Let's go.
I just don't. I would have bought it already, to be completely honest. Except I don't have a Mac anymore. That's the only reason I haven't.
I got to create an account now.
So sad. Sad.
All right. So before we wrap today, next week, we have Martin Resch. We're going to be interviewing next week, founder of SourceFire and Netography. And we've got Edward Wu from Extra Hop. That'll be a fun one, talking about the idea of an MRI for the cloud, talking about how network and packets still exist in the cloud and can still be useful for you. But that's all we've got for today. Thanks so much, Tyler and Katie, for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you.
And a big thanks to everybody watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We'll see you next week.